the Director of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives and the Racial Equity and Justice Initiative at Apple, Alisha Johnson-Wilder.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor to be here in this room of such esteemed leaders. I'm incredibly excited for the conversation we're having today about the role of venture capital in closing the racial wealth gap. And we've got an amazing panel of experts here and leaders who are doing incredible work in the space and approaching it from two very interesting perspectives. I am Alisha Johnson-Wilder. I lead Apple's Racial Equity and Justice Initiative, which is Apple's $100 million commitment focused on addressing systemic racism and addressing barriers to opportunity for communities of color. My two guests here are very aligned in that mission. We have Jewel Burke-Solomon, who is the managing partner for Collab Capital, and Samir Yousif, who is the CEO of Black VC. So I'm just going to start with you, Jewel. Right now, we know every year Black entrepreneurs receive less than 2% of VC dollars, and for Black women-led businesses, that's less than 1%. What does this cost the economy and specifically Black entrepreneurs? And share a little bit about what Collab is doing to address this challenge.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I want to put that statistic in context because I think we hear it a lot, 1%, 2%, but we don't necessarily know what that impact is to the larger economy. And just to kind of put that in perspective, if you think about companies that have been started over the last 50 years that have gone public, venture capital-backed companies represent 3/4 of the value created of those companies that have gone public over the last 50 years. And that equals about $30 trillion in market capitalization. So if you think about the fact that Black-owned businesses have only received less than 1% over that duration of venture capital, that should give you a sense of, from a value perspective, from a market cap perspective, what has been missed out on as a result of that lack of venture capital to Black founders. What we're doing at Collab is we're looking at what happens if you take venture capital as a model and you focus it on Black entrepreneurs. So we're exclusively investing in companies with Black founders. And we're not just investing venture capital dollars, but we're also supporting those entrepreneurs on all facets. So we're looking at what does it take to get to your markets? Who do you need to know? How do we not just bridge the gap from a capital perspective, but also from a network perspective? And what happens over the long term if we create an institution around that premise? That's what we're doing at Collab. We're just one fund. We raised $50 million. Closed in 2021. We're currently raising $100 million. We're looking to get more assets under management so that we can continue the mission of making sure that Black folks who are building great technology businesses have access to capital because we know that they're out there. There's been conversation about genius. Our tagline is transforming genius into generational wealth. The geniuses are already here, they're already building. So how do we make sure that we find them, we get them the access to resources that they need, we connect them to folks in the room here who are making decisions from a corporate perspective, who have the next capital that they'll need to continue to grow and scale to get to a point where they can one day take their companies public. All of that has to happen, and it has to happen quickly because the gaps, as you all know, are continuing to grow. But there is a huge opportunity and the solutions are here. So it's just a matter of how do we kind of put all these pieces together to make sure that we know the geniuses and we're getting them what they need to grow.
Fantastic, and I love that tagline. Is that something we can all adopt? So I want to follow up on that because we hear this narrative often that entrepreneurs of color, specifically Black entrepreneurs, are more inclined to create solutions that are tailor-made to their communities, that invest back in their communities. Is that a trend that you're seeing with your portfolio companies?
Absolutely, and it's something that we're looking for. We think that there are gaps, we've talked about them here, there's the gaps in education, there's gaps in healthcare, there's gaps in workforce development. We are, unfortunately, a lot of times proximate to the problems that exist in our communities. We know them, we've experienced them, And our belief is that folks who are proximate to problems oftentimes have the best solutions. So why don't we look there? Why don't we look inward in our communities to make sure that the people who are building the solutions understand the problems and know how to solve them? And so that's one of the core tenets of the investments that we make. Jasmine isn't here today. Her name was mentioned, Jasmine Crow-Gooder. She's a company that we've invested in. I was actually her first angel investor and recently took a seat on the board. So I'm by proxy representing. She is creating a solution to hunger, and she's creating a solution, or she has created a solution to waste. So she's tackling huge problems. And now she has, made millions of dollars helping corporations to not just throw their excess food, edible food that we throw away every single day, but she's created a logistics solutions to go and save that food and deliver it to hungry and homeless communities and nonprofits serving them in Atlanta and beyond. She has customers all over the US. That's a company that if you work at a corporation, you should be looking up how can your company do business with Gooder. Everybody has a waste management bill or some equivalent. And she's helping companies save on their waste management and get tax credits for all of the food that is not going into the landfills. And so, great solution. She figured out this problem because personally she saw hungry communities driving in Atlanta and decided this shouldn't be. And started to feed them out of her kitchen.
Wow.
And then realized there's this technology that's been built around Uber and DoorDash, and there's people that are moving food from place to place. Why can't we move food that would otherwise be thrown out to people who need it? And built a logistics solution around that. So that's the type of companies and the type of geniuses that are among us. But it's now a matter of making sure that they get the capital to grow and scale. Jasmine, I met her very early in her journey. She has had a difficult time raising funding. Luckily, she got a chance to learn from my experiences, having built a business and sold it. And so we were right there, and I've been along with her through the journey. But it's ridiculous how difficult it's been for her, given that she's answering a huge ESG problem for a lot of corporations. And she's built this incredible technology to make what really isn't, honestly, hunger shouldn't be an issue. We have plenty of food. 40% of what's in landfills is food that could otherwise be consumed. So, making sure that she's just one example of the companies that get the resources in, not just on the capital side, but also on the corporate side. Again, literally every single company in this room can use her technology. I'm sure your company serves food. What happens at the end of the day? If you go and ask, more than likely they're throwing that food away. So that's a soapbox, but just wanting to show you that I think a lot of times we hear stories about the Mark Zuckerbergs, and I think Sam Bankman-Fried was mentioned earlier, which is a whole nother story. But the reality is the geniuses do exist in our community, and our responsibility is how do we rally behind them? Because all of those folks, the Mark Zuckerbergs and all of those people, they had a whole set of people who were invested in their success. We have to do the same thing for the geniuses in our community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Samara, I want to pivot to you on a pretty timely topic. Silicon Valley Bank, the collapse. I know you all at Black VC have a long-standing relationship with Silicon Valley Bank, and you've been doing a lot to provide resources for entrepreneurs that are wondering what this means for them. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing at Black VC to put those resources forward to the community?
Yeah. And I'm grateful to Silicon Valley Bank and a lot of the folks that work there and may no longer be there now for the impact that they have had, not just on Black VC, but on a variety of other diversity-focused organizations within venture capital and startups. What folks don't know is they've probably been a strategic partner across the board to a lot of these groups. And for a lot of entrepreneurs and fund managers that are breaking out into the industry at the early parts of their careers, oftentimes we're some of the first banking partners that they can have. And so I think the impact of the collapse of SVB, obviously that's still being felt across the banking industry, and we're not necessarily out of the woods in terms of the broader contagion effect. But I think outside of that, there is a massive knock just on a lot of the progress that's been made and some of the growing headwinds, right? From, as many of y'all probably saw the Wall Street Journal article speaking about, having a Black and LGBTQ board members as potentially a cause to the collapse. And although that was a pretty objectively terrible take, I think it ties back into an underlying push, right, or whiplash against a lot of the perceived progress that's been made over the last 3 years in the wake of George Floyd. So I think, luckily for a lot of the entrepreneurs and folks that had deposits at SVB, they've been made whole. But I think the next question is which party, which group will help to provide banking services, access networks, and just additional resources and such in general for folks from our communities. And I know B of A and other institutions have stepped in, but it is a massive gap in the market that's currently been opened.
Fantastic. Yeah, objectively terrible. I think that nails it. Thank you for that. And I know Black VC recently partnered with Silicon Valley Bank on your second annual State of Black Venture report, which is really analyzing how Black investors are participating and progressing in the venture ecosystem. So can you share a little bit, based on your learnings, about how we can build a VC ecosystem where the needs of Black entrepreneurs are truly being met?
Yeah, and to take a step back quickly, so Black VC, we're the professional organization for Black venture investors, focused on closing the racial funding gap, but specifically focused on the investment side of the ecosystem. So we do that through education, recruitment support, data advocacy. We have chapters across the US, programs that are run across the board. And our focus is, and our underlying hypothesis, if we change who the investors are, right, what networks they're coming from, what problems they think they're significant enough to solve, you also then change where that capital is flowing. And so I think, to be honest, Jewel is kind of a perfect example of the impact of Black investors just across the board. And in the story you were sharing about Gooder and Jasmine, in terms of not only being there to empathize and understand the problems that she was trying to solve, but also having that expertise and empathy to also help coach her through her journey, I think is exemplary of the impact of Black investors. But so we, as you mentioned, we did publish our second actual report, the State of Black Venture report, which I encourage you to read up on in partnership with the SVB. And so to give you some high-level marks, about 4% of the venture industry today is Black, about 3% of partners are Black. However, when you're looking at the AUM within the Black community, that's much, much smaller, right? And we're seeing that, on average, Black fund managers are raising funds that are about 35% smaller than their target size, which does have a lot of downstream implications in terms of our ability to execute on the portfolio construction strategy we developed, back as many entrepreneurs as we had strategized, and really build out the teams and institutions that are built to last. At the same time, we're seeing that Black fund managers, specifically and Black investors across the board, have an asymmetrically large impact on the broader community, right? Black fund managers are 4x more likely to invest into Black entrepreneurs than their non-Black peers. We found that 3/4 of all junior talent that we interviewed or we surveyed were being actively mentored by a Black senior leader in the venture industry. So it's not just about deploying capital; it's about paving the way, for the next generation. As I believe Ray McGuire kind of mentioned, like, you can't be what you can't see, and you're seeing that kind of like propping open the door a little bit further for our community. And so I think there's a lot of progress been made in terms of seeing more junior Black talent break into the industry and grow. We're also seeing a much higher level of gender diversity within the junior bench. We're sitting at about 35% of junior talent are women versus about 16% of partners are women in the Black community. That's nowhere near where we need to be, but I think it's a start, right? And things that we need to kind of focus on intentionally. So from the general, I guess, takeaway that we got from the report is that there are still, there is strong progress being made. We are seeing, new Black fund managers launch kind of built institutions and scale into their next funds. But at the same time, there's a lot of systemic barriers still in play. And our concern is that now heading into this new, this economic downturn, this new instability within the financial system, that we will be the first to get cut, right? And so I think the significance of BEA and the work that we're doing here is to continue having these conversations, and truly privileged to be here and speaking on the stage where the giants that are kind of built it, we're working on their shoulders. So.
Fantastic. Jewel, I want to pivot back to you because I know that there's been a really specific focus on technology with Collab, and that's something that obviously at Apple we believe really strongly in. You talk a little bit more about the opportunity that you see specifically for Black entrepreneurs in technology in the space.
Absolutely. I think it has to do with something that was mentioned earlier about there being a mismatch between where we are typically building businesses as Black folks and where economies are going and where you really see wealth creation happening. And the reality is technology is influencing every single industry. Every business that is being built today should be a technology business in the sense of you have to leverage technology to figure out how to grow and scale and get to markets faster. And we're seeing it happen. I mean, raise your hand if you've tested ChatGPT or heard of it. Tested, heard of it? Okay, great. That's good. I'm happy to see so many hands because the reality is OpenAI, generative AI is going to completely upend how we think about work, how we do our work. And if we're not testing it, trying it out, figuring out how this all plays together, we're going to be left behind. And so for all the hands that are raised, making sure that the communities that you come from are also testing and learning and figuring out how to make their work and their jobs easier, and figuring out how do you become the illustrator and the creator of these technologies and not just the person whose job was replaced by them. That is really, I mean, it's happening fast. Mm-hmm. I built an AI company 10 years ago, and the speed of innovation that's happened in the last year, 6 months, is just mind-blowing to me. And I've been looking at these types of problems for over a decade. So when I tell you, like, there's urgency, if you hear any urgency in my voice, it's real because it's happening right now. And so making sure that we are part of the solutions, we're building the solutions, and it's really very much driven by technology and understanding how technology plays in all of the other parts of our lives and the industries that have to do with healthcare and work and all of these, relevant pieces of how we live our daily lives. That is just critical. And so that's our focus at Collab. And even companies that don't think they're technology companies, we're trying to help them see how they can reframe how they're looking at themselves. And then making sure that they have the capital to really grow. But that, it's imperative for us to understand that these things they're not waiting on us. We have to be a part of not just the conversation, but the action.
Absolutely, and that urgency is so important. I'm actually going to quote Ray McGuire as well, who said this can't just be a kumbaya moment. And if Sam Tweedy is involved, I think we can all feel very certain that it won't be. But both of you, leaders in this space, are sitting in a room full of business leaders, nonprofit leaders, government leaders. So I want to ask both of you this final question. One, what solutions are you seeing that are working? And then what can you ask the folks in this room to do to help to mobilize that capital and to close the racial wealth gap more quickly?
If I could actually jump in and throw a question back at you first, because I know Apple's been playing a pretty significant role in the space, both Black fund managers and entrepreneurs, but it'd be great to just share a little bit more about what you're seeing and doing at Apple as well and how that's influencing the space.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. We at Apple launched our Racial Equity and Justice Initiative just over 2.5 years ago, really looking at our opportunity to leverage so much of the work that was already happening, focused on equity and closing gaps to opportunity. But it was important to specifically put a focus on systemic racism and for a company like Apple to call that out. And so we focused in 3 areas: education, criminal justice reform, and economic empowerment. And that's easily our largest pillar because as a company, we spend a lot of money both outside of Apple and in our supply chain. So we approached it in 3 different ways. The first was to look at our supply chain, to look at who we're awarding contracts to, and we set some really robust internal goals for increasing our spend with minority-owned businesses. We've seen some great progress in that space. And the second was actually wraparound services. we already have this tremendous track record globally of helping businesses to scale, and we knew that we could do that specifically for entrepreneurs of color. And so we focused on building out things like our Entrepreneur Camp for Black founders, where we have a cohort of founders that come in annually, and they get one-to-one mentorship with Apple executives to help them scale their app-based businesses and really to grow their capital. We launched a developer academy in the city of Detroit, specifically because Detroit has 50,000 minority-owned businesses. And we knew if we could place that developer academy in downtown Detroit, we could tap into all of that talent. We just graduated our first class of 100 students. Some of those we hired back into Apple, others went on to the city of Detroit, GM, but really demonstrating that that is a direct pipeline to opportunity and to job growth. And then the last was a new space for us. One was directly investing in Black-owned banks. We deployed $25 million in capital to CDFIs and MDIs and underbanked communities around the United States. And then our last piece was direct investment into venture capital funds, which was new. It was a first for Apple, but we knew that there were VCs that were specifically focused on funding minority-led businesses. Collab obviously has been a fantastic partner. When we started to vet the space, one of the first names that crossed our radar, and one that is truly kind of aligned in this mission. And so that was an easy decision for us. But really looking at how can we fund these businesses, but at the same time, how can we ensure that they're getting the exposure and the access that they need to drive that forward? And so I think I'm grateful to work for a company that recognized that we have a role, and not just a role, but a responsibility to be proactive in this space, and one that's also not backing away. We've talked a little bit about seeing that regression, and that's something that I'm not seeing in my role, which has been really positive.
Amazing.
Fantastic. So I want to close this out by putting that call out to the room and asking both of you, what can folks in this room do to help, and what's working and what's not working, if there's an example there as well.
I'll kick it off. First, thank you to Apple for supporting our work at Collab Capital, and also Bank of America, two incredible LPs for us, and we hope that you all continue to invest. And I would say, the gaps we're talking about are multi-trillion dollar gaps, and so we need thousands of companies to take the same stance that Apple and Bank of America and others in the room have taken as it relates to investing, particularly in venture capital. That's the hat that I wear, because I think when we talk about scalable businesses and the millions of dollars that we need to infuse, billions, trillions of dollars that we need to infuse in this asset class for us to catch up to that number that I mentioned at the beginning, that's going to be what's required. And I have seen many of the corporations who made large commitments in light of the events of 2020, many of them, because of changes in the economy, have taken a step back from some of those commitments or are not re-upping on the commitments, and that's not good. So we need to continue to put pressure to make sure that folks stay true to the commitments that they made, and two, recognize that it's not a short-term thing, and it's a long game that we're playing here, and we need continued partnership and commitment to get to where we're trying to go. I think for everyone in this room, there's a very immediate action item. I saw Valerie Mosley. I don't see her right now, but she's in the building. She's raising capital for her company, Right Up. They're one of our portfolio companies. We've invested. We need partners to help to make sure that she gets where she needs to go. She has been a professional in the financial industry for decades. She's proven that she can run a great business. So if you see her, let her know I sent you to her to learn more about her business and how either you can invest, you can introduce her to an investor, you can introduce her to a customer. I just want to make sure you hear what I'm saying as far as the geniuses are among us. There are people building great businesses that you're probably sitting beside, and it's on all of us to get involved and get active and see how we can make sure that those geniuses have the support around them on the customer side, on the investment side, on the mentorship side in some cases, and they're here. So that's an action item you can do. I think she's wearing red, so make sure you find her. And then for us, as I mentioned, Collab Capital, our website is collab.capital. There are 30 other people just like Jasmine and like Valerie who we've invested in, and we need to help them get to that next level. So I encourage you to go on our website and check out all of the businesses that are building great solutions to big problems, and we need your support to help them get to the point of being public or selling.
Fantastic. And Samara, the same question for you.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I think you were really holistic.
And can I just say how fortunate your portfolio companies are to have you out here representing for them?
There she is.
She's not wrong. She's not wrong. Yeah, I think being brief, obviously I'm very not only focused on the venture capital space. Ultimately, limited partners have a massive impact on not only just what kind of venture funds they back, but influencing the GPs as well. And so I think, one, we have to start to focus on where is this capital actually starting, whether it's university endowments, public pension funds, family offices, et cetera. I think there's a massive role for folks that are either involved there or have influence there and pushing them to really think about their allocation strategies across asset classes, specifically in venture capital. I think within venture firms in general, right? The data has already been out there in terms of diverse teams are profitable, it's good, everybody knows the data, and yet people aren't acting on it. So I think specifically in the venture industry, it is such a network-driven and can be very siloed industry. And so making that active effort, right, to connect into more diverse communities, connect into diverse fund managers, organizations like Black VC and other corporates that are doing this work to actually have better, more diverse pipeline and ultimately make those checks. Founders have a lot of influence in the venture ecosystem as well. And a lot of times venture funds are catering to these founders, right? So founders who are saying, we will accept you onto our cap table essentially, but we need to understand your own policies and perspectives on specifically diversity, equity, inclusion within your own firms, within your investments, because that's important to us. That kind of consistent pressure from all sides, I think, will start to drive the venture industry a little bit to a more inclusive space. Then lastly, I think public policy has a massive role to play in this, whether we're talking about government allocate funded, like state small business credit initiative, or even just much broader mission-related investments. I think it's behoove us to also be aware of what are the policy initiatives and how can we keep pushing things to a more equitable space.
Absolutely. Jewel, Samara, thank you so much for what you're doing and for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah.